Afia Ross was a bright and independent 18-year-old who had just begun to explore the freedom and possibilities of adulthood. Her parents, Mr. and Mrs. Ross, had always been protective, especially since they had lost their only son a few years ago. They were deeply concerned for their daughter's well-being. One late Saturday morning, as the sun peeked through the curtains of the Ross family's cozy suburban home, Mr. and Mrs. Ross awoke to find their daughter's bedroom door ajar. They noticed an unfamiliar sound, a soft murmur and the steady breathing of two people. Mr. Ross, concerned and a bit anxious, approached the room to investigate. As he pushed open the door, his eyes widened in shock and anger. Afia was asleep in bed, her arm draped over a man who was clearly not her age, Christopher, a 40-year-old acquaintance of the family. The sight was jarring. Mr. Ross's heart raced as he tried to make sense of what he was seeing. Afia! Mr. Ross shouted, shaking his daughter awake. Afia's eyes fluttered open, and she looked groggy, confused, and immediately alarmed. When she saw her parents' angry faces, she tried to explain, but her words were mumbled and incoherent. Mr. Ross's rage boiled over. He grabbed Christopher by the collar and yanked him out of the bed. "What is this?" Mr. Ross roared, his voice filled with a mix of betrayal and fury. Mrs. Ross, equally shocked, joined him. Her face pale but resolute. She pulled out her phone, ready to call the authorities. Christopher, caught off guard and disoriented, tried to defend himself, but his words were lost amidst the chaos. "Please, let me explain," he began, but Mr. Ross's fist cut him off. The struggle between Mr. Ross and Christopher quickly escalated. Mrs. Ross, struggling to stay calm, called 911 while trying to separate the two men. In the scuffle, Christopher's attempts to calm Mr. Ross only seemed to fuel his anger. "You're too old for her," Mr. Ross yelled, his hands shaking as he pushed Christopher away. He had always been cautious about Afia's friendships, but this was beyond anything he had anticipated. As the police arrived, they quickly took control of the situation. They separated Mr. Ross from Christopher and started questioning everyone involved. The officers, trained to handle such sensitive cases, spoke with Afia privately. She was tearful and clearly distressed, trying to explain that while Christopher was significantly older, their relationship had been consensual and that they had been friends for a long time. Mr. Ross and Mrs. Ross were not convinced. They felt their daughter was too young to make such decisions, influenced by an older man who should have known better. They struggled with the idea that Afia might have been manipulated, despite her protests of understanding. The police conducted their investigation, speaking with both parties to piece together the full story. Christopher, although shaken, tried to maintain his composure and explain his side. Afia's parents, still in disbelief, hoped the authorities would see their perspective and act in their daughter's best interest. Eventually, the officers came to a conclusion. They determined that while Afia was legally an adult and her relationship with Christopher was not illegal, they advised counseling and mediation for the family to address the underlying issues of trust and communication. The situation left deep scars on the family dynamic. And while they managed to avoid criminal charges, it was clear that healing and understanding would take time. In the aftermath, Afia and her parents sought therapy to work through the emotions and misunderstandings that had arisen. The incident served as a harsh reminder of the challenges families face in navigating the complexities of relationships and the importance of open dialogue. The story of that morning became a turning point for Afia and her parents, forcing them to confront their fears and assumptions while learning to respect Afia's autonomy and decisions as she navigated the path to adulthood. To our listeners, how old is too old? How would you have handled this situation? There were a lot of emotions involved. Romance Unscripted podcast by Ms. Howney Media. Good night.